if you don't already know the theory of the situation you're playing, then it can't be summoned in this moment, right? It's not there. So don't spend any energy on it.
Imagine how we would treat solver outputs differently if they were recordings of two of the best players. Like imagine we just had the strategic outputs aggregated of two best players who played millions of hands against each other, and how differently we would think about that.
There's not a lot that happens in solver play that contradicts the way that we thought the game was supposed to operate. You know, there's just learn extra little tricks and details.
Hey guys. Welcome to the next episode of the Seeking Balance podcast. I'm your host, Jared Alderman. This week, we bring you Kevin Rabichow. Kevin is a good friend of mine, and he was my poker coach for some time. He has over $7 million in tournament winnings, and he's been a poker coach for over 15 years. Kevin has incredible insight, not just in how to play strategically, but also how best to learn the game. With that, he seems like a great person to dive into a topic that I'm deeply interested in, which is story and how telling the right story and narrative plays a part in understanding strategy. So we really try to blend the quantitative and strategic data that comes out of solvers and mesh it with how it is we actually think while we're in game. This gap, I do think, explains a lot of how players who are watching online content and have coaches yet struggling to execute in game, I think this topic explains a lot of why this gap exists. So I really hope this is useful to you. And without further ado, I bring you Kevin Rabichow. Kevin, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this.
No problem. Always good to talk, Jared.
I know this is like multiple conversations through now. I will say that this is not to serve. We've had other conversations that are also on my YouTube profile, on my channel, that this is not to serve as a substitute of that. So I'm going to try my best to not rehash stuff we've already talked about. So if you're looking for some of the other things we've already discussed, if you're as the viewers, I would go there. So just to get started, how are you doing? What's your life like these days? Do you have any projects you're working on? Just what's going on with you in life right now?
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a couple of things that we've been working on together, which is always fun because when we're coaching together, it takes a little bit of a different shape than my usual coaching work. I still have, so I guess like to backtrack, the last couple of months I've been at home in Canada. I've been coaching a lot, and I really haven't played a full series of tournament poker since the World Series in the summer. But I popped over to Montreal for a little bit and happened to win a small tournament. So that was a fun time.
Small tournament.
It's small by entrance. It was a 10K though. So
yeah, you won a high roller. You won a WPT High Roller. Yeah,
I did. I won a WPT High Roller. Okay. I'll call it what it is. I was happy about that. I mean that I've said in other places, but people are perhaps would be surprised to know that was my first live tournament win ever. So that felt good. That's maybe even a callback to a conversation we had like a year ago when I was on a string of second place finishes in live tournaments. So this is the one.
I was just going to say that our conversation on the GTO Wizard podcast just went live, and it was funny because I was with you in Montreal on WPT, and when that released, watching it back and hearing you say I've yet to win a live tournament, it was like that's one of your tournament goals. You did it, yay!
I mean, I got I'll be honest about why I think I'm downplaying it. Like you imagine that the first tournament you win is going to be like a big deal, and there's going to be, I don't know, like celebratory music or I don't know, confetti coming from the ceiling, at least a trophy. I got nothing. Like it was a quiet room. I was heads up against a friend of mine. I beat him. Like he's a pro, so he doesn't even he's not complaining or anything. He doesn't even really say congrats. He's just like, oh, all right, GG. Like, and like no one's there. It's a dark room. There's other tournaments going on. There's no stream. There's no, and there was no trophy.
Congratulations, Kevin. Congratulations on your tournament win.
I'm not sour. I'm not sour about it at all. I'm just painting the picture for why I'm downplaying this win.
Did it feel good though? Despite the lack of what would you call it? The lack of pageantry that you felt you deserved. But did it feel good to like have a tournament win, like to have that booked?
Yeah, definitely. It I mean, it was really fast. Like I actually registered for that tournament the same day that I won it. It was a 2-day tournament where you could register on day 2. So in the moment, it was just like, okay, cool. That felt good. I ran really good. And then, I got home and like actually had some messages from family, and my dad got hyped. My dad's my biggest fan, which is always really comforting, to nice. See like how excited he gets about this kind of stuff. So that, it felt good. Like probably didn't sink in until I got on the phone with my parents and talked to them about the experience.
Didn't you say you were down to 3 blinds at some point?
I was. It was. I was complaining a lot during this tournament, like an uncharacteristic amount for me, because I felt that the structure was really poor. I still feel the structure was really poor, and not just that it was a fast tournament. Like we played a day 1 that was about 6 hours long, and then we paused play, came back for day 2 like 18 hours later or something. We were done in like the late afternoon, and then we came back the following day at 12. I was like, why are we taking so much time off? But they had other stuff going on in the schedule, and it just, that's how it worked. So I was complaining about that, and then I came back for day 2 and I got knocked out, but late reg was still open. So I re-enter, and now I'm just at a late reg table, like a table full of people who just re-entered. And again, I'm like, how is this happening in a high roller that they've just taken the last 8 people to sit down and just put us all together? So we all have 20 blinds and we're all sitting together. And I lose a bunch of hands at that table, play my big blind. I'm down. You
haven't studied enough symmetrical stacks. That was the problem, right?
Well, I was down to like, I don't know, 5 or 6 big blinds after posting my big blind, and then the table breaks because all the other whatever, they decided to break us first. That's fine. So then I get moved to a new table and I'm in the big blind again. So now I post my big blind again and I have 3.5 behind or whatever. I get dealt a fold. So I fold like a whole orbit. And then, and then I end up all in, I think, for 3 big blinds from under the gun, win that hand, double it again after that.
What's the threshold? Under the gun, 3 big blinds. What are you not going all in with?
I mean, you're probably only, I know you have to post the big blind ante the next hand, but you're probably only in with like half the deck or give or take. Like,
that makes sense, right? You're basically like, do I have a, if I have a 50-50 chance between getting a dealt a better hand the next hand that I'm guaranteed to be all in.
Yeah. I mean,
you probably want to,
I mean, I don't know the exact, I don't know the exact range offhand, but I think people overestimate, they overstate the loss that you're going to have next hand. They're like, oh, you're going to post the whole big blind ante. It's like, yeah, but I'm also going to get a good percentage of it back because I'm just going to be all in like 90% of the time next hand. Yeah. Like if I do have to post the big blind, I'm just going to be all in, C5 cards, get my share of the pot back. So it's not like I put 1 big blind in the garbage can next hand. Like I'm going to get most of it back.
No, that's a good point.
Or like a good chunk of it.
You haven't, the odds that you fold are so low that I mean, unless it goes like 2 people get all in and like the
strategy is just to like end up all in next hand. So you're kind of just saying, okay, what's a hand I can go all in with now that loses me less than whatever the EV is of just like running it next hand for my last 3 bigs.
Yeah, makes sense. So the topic I kind of want to open with you today, and I'll kind of just like throw this out there because we've had a lot of conversation, so I had to do some creative problem solving around what would be worth it for us to talk about. But I think one of the things that, there's ways in which I think you and I think similarly about poker, and ways, I think one of the things that goes under recognized that can be easy to not realize is happening is kind of the way that you think about the information you study when you're in game. So just to like, maybe, we both coach people, and sometimes I see this kind of breakdown in communication where, you see people parroting what they hear coaches or other people say, or they're producing ideas that are not relevant for the situation. And one of the things that I have recognized that kind of happens with people is they're trying to take this information that they study. They're kind of trying to memorize a bucket of qualities or characteristics of hands and situations and things like that. And then they're trying to mash this all together, find the relevant ones when they're in game. And the result of this is there's a lot of variables in any particular spot. There's like a lot of things happening. And your effectiveness at actually kind of taking these explicit ideas, choosing the right ones, applying them in the right situation, and coming with a good way to play your hand is probably pretty low. But it can, when someone's talking in this way, it can sound like they're talking poker, right? It can sound very poker theory-esque. They can, be saying things like, well, I hold the 10 of spades, and, and this is and very missing the fact that these aren't relevant. And the thing that I've kind of honed in on that I'm going to pitch to you is, I think there's a way in which at least I study and kind of take this information that is quantitative. It's kind of, explicit, like number oriented. But then when I'm playing in a far more qualitative way, if that makes sense. I'm thinking far more narratively, and this is going to be something that I want us to thread apart. But, it's much more, again, narrative is really the best word I have for it. It's much more qualitative, and within that, certain relevant properties kind of stand out. So, this can come as simple as, oh, I look really strong here, and my opponent has just raised me. This is a more difficult spot for someone to find a bluff, right? Like I look incredibly strong and have just been raised. Yeah. This is kind of a narrative. Like this is qualitative. This isn't ingrained in the strategy. And these kinds of things I think are really important, even if you're not playing exploitatively, right? Yeah. Like even if you're trying to play in a kind of theoretical way, these things you can actually get closer to understanding strategy when you can, because you can encompass a lot of data in a kind of story that you can't encompass in just like words and numbers and figures and things like that. So I'm just going to open the floodgates of that and pitch it to you and get your response.
Yeah, it has me thinking about a short video series that I did when I went on Solve for Wise. I forget what season, like season 8 or something of Poker Out Loud. Mm-hmm. You've seen that show, right? Mm-hmm. And can
you explain it for people who haven't?
Yeah, like the concept is basically it's a live cash game in studio. So everyone's wearing noise canceling headphones, and everyone is kind of live recording a training video while they play a cash game. So we were playing 5-10 with a big blind ante, I think it was. So 5-10-10. And I was playing against, Matt Berkey, Landon Tice, Xuan Liu, Michael Acevedo, like a bunch of people who maybe I don't play with all the time, but I'm loosely familiar with their game. And each of us kind of one by one is, as we get to our decision, we're turning off the noise canceling, speaking our thoughts, and then putting it back on, and play continues. So what was really interesting that came of that was that I noticed my own urge and everyone else's kind of natural urge to over explain, to just say stuff for the sake of saying stuff. And I don't think this is necessarily like a bad thing for the content. I think it's actually great for the content, but as poker players, I think we were all playing worse because we were spending so much time like narrating these thoughts that don't matter. And we were like placing extra importance on these things. So I think it's the same phenomenon when you're like a poker player who's learning from training videos exclusively, or you're a poker player learning from the voice of your coach exclusively. And that's kind of, it's playing in your head every time you're in a spot. So you think, oh, well, I'm in this spot, so I'm supposed to think about those things that they said in that video or that they said. So I ended up doing this like meta analysis video series, which I really enjoyed doing. And I'd love to do more of that work. But I did this like meta analysis where I listened back to the commentary, and I recorded like strategic thoughts on the things that people were saying in the video. And exactly what I noticed was like, yeah, we were just constantly talking about stuff that couldn't possibly be relevant to the decision that they wanted to make. Just talking about like, oh yeah, this is a board where maybe I would have some leads. What kind of hands would I want to lead in this situation? Well, I'm not really sure. And then like getting off into discussion around like range versus range interaction in theory about a hand that we don't have, like all while spending time thinking about what we should do with our hand, right? So it's just like, okay, now I got to finish this 2-minute thought experiment before I can even get to the part where I'm figuring out what the best play is. So I guess like that gave me the medium to start thinking about why this happens and what I guess the problem is, or from my point of view, what the problem is. And I started to teach in private coaching or in seminars a more straight to the point method of thinking through situations in game, like a more direct line from the incentives that you have with your hand to the decision that you want to make, and a lot less trying to cut away as much as possible of this like theoretical recall in the moment.
Yeah.
Because my opinion is that like if you don't already know the theory of the situation you're playing, then it can't be conjured to life. It can't be summoned in this moment, right? It's not there. So like, just don't spend any energy on it. If it's there, if it's there and you're making good decisions, or I guess I should say, if it's there and you're like well connected to the game and just like playing in a, I don't want to say in a flow state, but if you're just kind of in flow and you're just making decisions like the way you naturally would, that theory is somewhere in there, like inserting itself into your decision-making process. And I kind of encourage people to trust more that it's gonna shape the way that they think about the spot already. It doesn't need to be consciously brought up from somewhere. And you can use more of your in-game decision-making power to do things like pay attention to your opponent's state of mind and pay attention to the details of the environment, like the way that this isn't more of a live game thing, but the way that all the bets happened and the pace at which they happened and the sizing at every decision point, and then all the things about how people normally play these situations. Like that's the stuff that feels like it should take its place at the front of your mind.
Yeah, because I think what happens is there's this sense that people who have really good recall of theoretical variables in game or can like, there's people who you watch narrate themselves play and they really just dial in on like the relevant thing. Like Jarrett Mann is someone who I've watched, kind of narrate his own play, and he strikes me as someone who does a very good job at just being like, these are the things that are relevant. This is why I'm making this decision. But what those things are constantly changing, depending on the spot. And then I think it can create a kind of sense of overwhelm for people of like, how do I run through all of these things in time? How do I consider all of the things that matter?
Yeah.
And I think it can be useful to kind of spell out more clearly that what is happening in really good players' minds often is not actually a recall of all of these things. It is rarely a rundown of relevant variables, ending in a, I can't speak to everybody. I don't, but the players who I know, they're using the same words and the same language. And that's what's tricky about language, right? Is like, if I start talking about how X card is really important in this spot, and then someone else does it in another spot, on the surface, it can seem the same, but really what's underlying, what produced that concern can be totally different. For one person, it could be this kind of anxiety around coming up with every possible variable, and then this one feeling good. Yeah. I guess, how do you work? Because you mentioned you've started coaching a more direct way of kind of going through your incentives.
Yeah.
to your hand's considerations. Can you say more about that? Like what does that look like for people?
Yeah, I find it easiest to teach this, let's say, on starting at the river, because I also believe like a separate structural decision with the way that I execute in game is that my river decision making is completely, let's call it like without limitation. Like I would like to allow myself on the river to call any hand that feels like it could call, fold any hand that feels like it should fold, raise any hand that feels like it should raise, just kind of do whatever seems like the right thing to do on the river. Whereas like I don't always take that approach pre-flop or on the flop. Like I'm a little more structure
Constrained.
theory. Sure. Yeah, like constrained by theory in those earlier decision points. So on the river, I have suggested to people that they, let's imagine that you're holding a hand that you might want to bluff, and with that hand that you might want to bluff, you have some amount of knowledge, presumably, about whether it's the right board texture or the right situation, theoretically, or the right blockers or whatever. But before any of that, I encourage people to walk themselves back and replay the hand in their head. So basically just like relive the experience of that whole hand. And it ties into what you were saying about narrative, which I think is like relatable for me, and the way that I find myself thinking if I'm paying attention in game is like I'm going back through the story, and I'm kind of experiencing the story of what happened during this hand. And hopefully what happens as you're experiencing it in real time, or as you take a beat on the river to go back and re-experience it, is that something stands out to you, you get hit with a little lightning bolt of information that says like, oh, of course they're weak, or oh, of course there's and I've had this experience, I'm sure you have as well, like many times while playing. But it's just the kind of thing, like if you ever find yourself on the river just not even thinking twice about the bluff that you're about to make, very often, well, and unless you're just an impulsive bluffer, then very often this is going to be, could be either one in your case. But like the thing that's happening subconsciously that good players are maybe not aware is happening is like something clicked at some point in this hand that reassured them that their opponent was weak, or reminded them of a situation where they've had success bluffing in the past or whatever, right? Like something clicked and it's like, oh yeah, this situation is familiar. Bluffing just works here. So that's the feeling if we didn't catch it the first time that I'm hoping to catch the second time through. And if it doesn't come up, like if there's no obvious information that jumps out at you while you're replaying the hand, then it's like, all right, I guess we just have to go with what we know. Now we can kind of move our way towards that more rational step-by-step approach. Are there any relevant pieces of information that I know about poker theory in general that say that this is a good bluff spot, or is there anything about my hand and the bet size and whatever that make this a good bluff spot? But first and foremost, just does this feel like a good bluff spot because of something that happened during this hand?
Yeah, and even within that though, that's so you get you run through the hand and nothing stands out at you as obviously weak or obviously strong, or the things that you mentioned. To me, even when you're trying to do your best approximation of what is theoretically true, my experience is one of still replaying, of kind of building up this spot, again, in a kind of narrative way of like, okay, well, do I have, like, the question of do I have many strong hands here? It can seem very quantitative, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But there's also like, it's hard because you can get in spots where, like, let's say I'm trying to figure out if my hand should bluff or not, right? Figuring out like, okay, well, how often am I betting here for value? If the answer is little, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be bluffing, right? Like it's just like, I just need the qualities of the bluff to go up, right? And having this sense of like, there is a kind of interplay between it. This is a hard thing to pin down with language, but even when I'm replaying theory, it feels very alive, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like, I think there's a way in which people talk about theory that they think this is this very cold, distant kind of process. I'm doubting if we're going to make any headway on this topic, but I don't know if you can kind of get what I'm talking about.
Well, what it makes me think of is that there's certain players, and I don't know if you're one of these players, but I've coached a lot of people who just always seem to be performing better against pros, or they always seem to be making better decisions, let's say, against pros. And I think a common reason for that is that if the story that they're sticking to when they evaluate a hand in the moment is tied pretty rigidly to theory, whenever that theory is kind of shared knowledge between you and your opponent, then the story is going to be pretty accurate. Like if you have a thought to yourself that's like, oh, I can't have many bluffs here, but here I am with a bluff, so I should probably bluff. Like, that's going to line up really well against an opponent who recognizes how few bluffs you have because they recognize the type of strategy you're playing. But if you're playing against someone who's on a completely different wavelength and they have no idea that, it might work out, but it might work against you if you use that kind of logic to drive a bluff, right? Because the story is just not being perceived the same way on the other side.
And I think people feel this tension, right? So like, I think this creates more errors, right? So like the type of play you're talking about, where they always play better against pros, I think part of what causes them to not play as well against fish is they don't realize I am doing this kind of narrative storytelling, and when I get against a fish, I'm not letting myself keep doing that and just change the story, if you will, like change it from their perspective. But I'm feeling this tension of my story not applying, and this insecurity causes me to try to move to a more explicit, dialed in thing where I can just say, okay, well, and then you get people coming up with really bad categorical assessments of fish, where it's like, okay, fish overfold, I bluff. Yeah. Right? Like this kind of thing. Or fish never do this, so I fold. Fish don't bluff. And that kind of conceptual like simplicity is really reassuring, but it is the kind of like cold, distant thing where I can just say, this is a static fact. It's just this is what it is. And I think this actually lack of kind of self-awareness, if you might say, that there is this kind of narrative thing happening when you're playing against pros, and what you think is just like this really good theoretical understanding. It's like, no, it's like you said, this kind of common landscape of understanding. Like I know that the story I'm telling in my head is the story that exists over there. And then when I get against a player who isn't in that category, I feel this tension of like, I don't know the story here. Like, I don't know the narrative that's happening right here.
Yeah, this has been actually a relatively common challenge in my coaching, because I have had pretty much the same conversation with a lot of pros, and we've gotten to the realization that they'll say something like, oh, I don't really understand what's going on inside that player's head, right? Like they'll just they'll accept that this is what's happening, and they'll want to do better. Like they'll want to be more in tune with the story that's happening in a recreational player's mind, but they just can't put themselves there. And it takes, I mean, I'm curious what you think about this, because it's actually been a challenge of mine to, I don't want to say like transfer this knowledge, but to help someone grow in this area, other than just saying, well, you got to keep playing and you got to pay attention. I mean, and I think people should do this. You should keep playing and pay attention. But beyond that, like what else can someone really do to work on that skill of getting inside that other player's head? I mean, some of the challenges that come up are, one, they're not always, they're more volatile. A recreational player, by just like the definition of them playing lower volume, having less of a rigid game plan, having less strategy in their game, that means their decision making is more emotional. It's more volatile. Yeah. So now you have to be in tune with their emotions, and you have to understand how that's going to, come forward in their play, right? And then there's also the type of recreational player who's trying to be more like a pro, and is trying to be disciplined, or is trying to, make money or whatever. And they're all going to have different reasons for their play, right? So like, how can someone keep track of all this? It's a difficult skill to learn.
I think the first part is to recognize that the what you're trying to do, like what people are usually trying to do when they're failing to do this well, it is not a matter of like just improving the skill you're attempting. I think this is where people get stuck, right? So it's like I'm trying to explicitly conceptualize things more. And if I only get enough concepts and explicit ideas around how these fish play, then I will do better. And I've seen people get stuck in this trap where they try to memorize heuristics about how fish play, right? And I'm sure you've seen this as well. The first thing to recognize is that I'm actually extremely uncomfortable playing against fish, right? That is, I think, the first thing to do is just like, I am uncomfortable. And I need to let myself like work on being able to feel that discomfort, because the narrative part of you, the thing where we're kind of talking about, it arises out of a sense of comfort and security. And well, it arises out of a sense of, like relaxation. I wouldn't even say comfort, because you can be relaxed within discomfort. Like I can be like, this is an uncomfortable situation, but kind of be easeful and relaxed in that. And so I think the first thing is to recognize that your reactivity around the discomfort is pushing you to try to find stability, like find something concrete, which is the very thing that's causing the mistakes, because you're trying to conceptualize things really clearly, which is just like this really solid conceptual grasp. Whereas usually with, players like this, when you have them talk about their strategy against pros, it's more fluid. It's more uncertain. It's almost like it's just like, yeah, they might do this, they might not, but I think this still feels like the best play. Like I'm not quite sure how they're responding. And then suddenly you put them against a fish and they need to feel like their decision's working all the time. They need to feel like they're making the right decision all the time. And it's that shift that's like, no, that is both the symptom and the problem, right? Like it's you trying to concretize something. But if you just let yourself not know, and then what arises out of not knowing is just natural curiosity, natural attentiveness, and then the more you're relaxed, this storytelling ability of your mind just comes online all by itself, in my opinion.
I think that's a good distinction to make, because noting that it was a challenge of mine to like convey this information to students is also because a lot of times the task of a coach feels like it's to take my experience as a player, boil it down into an explicit concept, transfer that explicit concept to my student, and then they can go out into the wild and they can make decisions the way that I make decisions. But I've seen in so many different areas that that's not the way it works. Like that's not possible. And this is because when I think about my own decision-making process against that volatile fish, it's not explicit in this way. Like I'm not going to the map and saying, oh yeah, like bet check bet for this size, or I'm not going to the map and saying, oh yeah, someone who just lost a pot this long ago and now chooses to do this on this board texture is likely to have value. Like that's not how it's happening. I'm just kind of like, there's something living back there in the bank of information, and it just shows up in the form of like, I think I should call here. that's kind of
And that's it's worth noting too, like experientially, how your mind finds, let's say, averages is through this sort of like implicit sense of feeling, right? So like when you're playing against fish, there's just like you said, there's like a more volatile range of players there. And so what you're often doing, at least how I feel, is unless you have a lot of experience with this particular recreational, you're kind of taking a statistical average of the way you assume players like this kind of play, and that for your mind to do that well, you kind of have to drop these concepts. Like you kind of have to drop these like explicit ideas, because and this is what's so, I think, uncomfortable is when you play against a fish. So often a feeling, like you recognize a feeling in a fish, could go either way. Like you're like, they're really frustrated. What does that mean they're going to do? I don't really know. Like I don't really know where that's going to go. And so what you're kind of forced to do is kind of like boil it down to kind of a statistical average that you think is likely. And that often is just based on this felt sense of like, it feels like this guy in this state, in this situation, is not going to want to call, and then you run the bluff, and then you get more data based on whatever happens.
Yeah. And the other thing, that came to mind when you were talking about how pros generally feel like they have to be right when they're playing against a fish. is that we forget, like it, I think somewhere built into this type of decision-making process is like pot odds and like gambling math, like just
Yeah.
the basic understanding that you don't need to be that right that often, or you don't need to be right that often in most of these situations. So if you can drop the need for certainty a little bit and just kind of, if you get the feeling, I don't know, I I definitely have heard a lot in the past, and I hate that idea. It's like, oh, if you feel like you might be right 25% of the time or whatever, and it's like, I don't have any idea what 25% feels like, but I definitely just know when the like doubt in my brain, or I guess doubt is probably in my stomach. If like the doubt that I'm feeling is strong enough, like I shouldn't fold getting 4-1, like that's just too much. Or if like those kind of things do have to map together. Cause I think some of what we're saying, it almost sounds like there's on the other side, there's like a magic solution to
Be right.
being able to being able to be right. But there's not. This is more about understanding that we have a desire to be right when we're in those situations where we maybe feel like we deserve to win. And that can cloud our ability to just make good decisions and feel okay with being wrong 60% of the time or being wrong 70% of the time or whatever.
Yeah. And I think it's emotionally difficult to just get owned by a fish, which happens. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think it's worth highlighting because even in what you're saying, like, well, there's like this pot odds thing. What I can see happening is people hearing like, oh yeah, there are pot odds. And then now they're tunnel visioning this concept the next time they're in a pot against a fish. And they're like, well, I'm getting 4-1. Like, I just can't, and that's the interesting thing about this is it really is like the experiential side of this data that I'm like, that I think it's underrated in how you're thinking strategically, which is like, yeah, it's not just, because there are spots where it's like, you could be giving me 100-1 and I'm not calling, like, and then there are spots where, and so, yeah, it's the interplay of these things that are like really useful.
I think I have yet to have one of those spots where I'm getting 100-1, but I'll let you know when I get there. No, getting 100-1 and folding.
Getting 101 and folding. I mean, like I folded top boat against a guy in a spot that it was just like, this is always quads, not ignition. And it was just like, I just refuse to believe I just can't imagine this ever being a bluff. Like just the way that
getting 100-1.
No, but I don't think the pot odds changed would have changed. I was getting a really good to one. Like I had bet almost my whole stack and gotten put all in.
Yeah.
For like, so I'm like, I'm probably getting like, I don't know, 15-1 or something, 10-1 at this point. I should go back and find the hand, but
that will come up every now and then for now that tournament players are like very often leaving one chip behind or like small amount of chips behind in big pots. You get that every now and then where it's like the gentleman's game of going all in right away on the other side, because it's like the courteous thing to do to not waste anyone's time. And then you face it and it's like, oh, well, I guess I should fold my thin value bet, like 300-1 or whatever.
Yeah. That's true. So one of the other things that came up while you were kind of talking about all this, because I think it can be, I think this aspect of it, and you highlighted it in the moment where you're talking about being a coach, where you're like, if I'm just trying to, it's not really transmitting information. And I guess what I'm thinking about is how can people be better students of the game and shifting the identity. If it's not good as a coach to just be transmitting information, it's probably not good as a student to just be seeking information, right? To just like purely be trying to find information. So what are the things as a student, like imagine you have a student, right, who's trying to improve in these ways. Are there things that come to mind for you of like, like beyond, like how do we integrate what it is I'm studying? Or I don't know if you've thought about this much, but what would come to mind for like, how do I integrate what I'm studying beyond just information? Like I'm looking at all these, all this data, maybe like aggregate reports or whatever. And now I'm going to play. What comes up for you?
Well, I had kind of started to think about this when you were speaking earlier, because the concern that I have, I guess, with talking about putting aside like explicit information is that I think there's a period of time in a lot of my students, or like whatever, let's just say poker players in general, there's a period of time in their learning process where they're lacking explicit information. They like don't know a lot of things yet, and they do
just to chime in though, because I think it's worth saying they're lacking two things though. They're lacking explicit information, but they're also lacking experience.
Definitely. Yeah.
Right.
So
and
like
the experience side is far more contextual information. So they're kind of lacking both.
Yeah, definitely lacking both. So like part of, like what the way that I would interact with a student who has less experience is going to maybe give like explicit concepts and the things that are happening to them in game closer to equal weight. You know, like I would emphasize that they need to learn. There's just like stuff they don't know about how the game works. There's stuff that they truly don't understand in terms of like how strong their hand is, or, you know, the situational analysis, I guess. But the experiences they're having like need to be paid attention to. It's like a good point to highlight. But then someone who's more experienced, like I coach some people now who have been playing longer than I have. So they've, you know, people who have been in the game for 20 years. And what a lot of my coaching is for them is like convincing them that their experience is worthwhile, and like convincing them that they need to spend less and less time worrying about getting like their theoretical game to a higher level. There are sometimes situations where their theory has been neglected so much that it's like it actually does need some help, but more and more utilizing to their advantage the fact that they have 20 years of experience like living in their brain, and helping them pay more attention to that stuff. But like I think the challenge that people run into with, I don't know, utilizing this effectively, like utilizing their experience effectively, or whatever we're calling like, you know, this kind of information, is that there's this lack of conversation in the way that we used to talk about poker hands, and a lot of the details that I think, you know, I'm thinking pre-solver, like the kind of analysis that I was doing, I don't know, 15 years ago when I was reviewing hands, is there was so much more said about every individual spot. Like there was just a lot of, there was a lot of exchange of ideas or exchange of knowledge that focused on what it meant when a person got into a specific situation and they did a certain thing. You know, it just felt like the way that we talked about hands included more like human elements. So some examples of that might be, you know, the timing of their plays, as on a very basic level, or it might be the combination of a bunch of previous history with players who are seated at the table around the two people who are involved in the hand, combined with the details that happen in the exact hand, right? So there's like this grander context that would get talked about, like, oh, I'm playing, you know, in this game, and this game doesn't run all the time, and the stakes are bigger than usual, and there's this person in the hijack, they're down this much money, like all this kind of what feels like unnecessary information, I think, to a lot of more theoretically minded, like new age players. And a lot of times it is, I mean, it's funny because back then, like the way we talked about hands, we were like, yeah, like all you fish who are so focused on game flow, like you got to get game flow out of your brain because it's, you know, it's so easy to level you, and it's so easy to, you know, reverse the dynamic that you're talking about. So you're just losing to all the good players. And, you know, maybe back then there was some truth to that but then fast forward to now, and I feel like a lot of people we've gone so far in the other direction that we just pretend game flow doesn't exist, and we pretend that timing tells don't exist, and we pretend that, you know, the human elements of running a bluff for the third time in a row for your tournament life don't exist. And it's just like, well, they do. Like so I guess big circle to actually answer your question, but I feel like what needs to happen more is players who are reviewing hands primarily through a solver lens or a theoretical lens need to add a lot more like environmental data, or a lot more, you know, like human elements to the way they talk about hands, so that they can get feedback from their peers and they can get feedback from their coaches on those elements of the game. And then they can just kind of grow in that area and start to recognize like, oh, I do that thing, or like, oh yeah, like I've experienced that before, and start to pick at all the stuff that this is kind of what experience can teach you if you're paying attention to it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how far down the thread I want to pull on what I'm going to say next, but we'll see how this goes. But I think there's this important distinction that I think a lot of poker players it's not obvious to any human being that like language itself is always symbolic of something more literal, like of something more like visceral and felt, and like more, again, like almost more narrative. Like story is so ingrained with how human beings understand anything that to make this attempt, if you think about what strategy means, like poker's a strategy game, right? Like we're playing a strategy. This in every other strategic context, it's so easy to see how like there's a story kind of at play here. Like if I was trying to memorize chess strategy, you can kind of create a narrative around what's happening. And I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is because I don't even know if I like this demarcation between like, oh, explicit concepts and then there's all these like more qualitative elements. To me, it's like, no, it's all qualitative. Like it's all qualitative, and your attempts to make it quantitative exclusively will always hurt you. Like you're always going to miss something. One of the things that's interesting is like when I used to do study groups early on, people thought that like I could memorize like the outputs of solvers quickly and well, but it was like, no, I'm just like, I actually have, like, I'm viewing it qualitatively. Like it feels like story to me. And so when it's so much easier to recall,
I think this is what people mean when they say stuff like, you need to learn from the solver, not copy the solver. You need to think like a solver. You don't need to be a solver, right? Like I think what you're calling narrative or story is just like the framing of the information, right? Like there's a strategy on screen. It involves bluffing this particular hand. Why does that matter? How can I make sense of the whole picture, like the whole story, if I just understand the rules of the game and just understand how the solver's operating, right? And now you've moved away from it's a 60% bluff on the river to it's a situation where bluffing with these properties makes sense or something like that. And if you're kind of zoomed out in that way, I feel like it applies to multiple scenarios. It reads a little bit more like logic in your brain. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's more so like imagine how we would treat solver outputs differently if they were recordings of two of the best players. Mm-hmm. Like imagine we just had the strategic outputs aggregated of two best players who played millions of hands against each other, and how differently we would think about that. Yeah, like I'm imagining
like there's commentators and they're talking about the match that's happening, and in the match that's happening, they're observing people make moves, and they would apply they would humanize it, right? Like they would make those moves about what the strategy is trying to accomplish. They'd make it about like motivation or incentives or whatever, right?
Teleological is kind of, this is a fancy word, but this is how like when we say the heart beats to pump in order to pump blood. That's not really technically true. But that's a teleological view of the heart beating, right? It's like this kind of intention-based view of the heart beating that helps us it can help us explain a lot about how like all kinds of things work. And if you'd apply this to kind of poker strategy, you'd be like, yeah, but what's the teleological explanation for this? Like, why is this happening? Mm-hmm. And again, it would shift so much when you actually think about, hey, what you're actually seeing when you see a solver output is a snapshot of an evolution of play over time. And it has gotten here. So there's literally a history to how we got here. There's player history between these two, if you will, right? And so like once you start, I think if you view solver outputs in this way, again, much more in this kind of lived process centered way, it's like, no, this came from something. It's not, you're not just seeing static data on a screen, that it is your now attempts to kind of interpret. And this is where like, it's just, I don't know. I used to be anti this when I was first getting into solvers. Like people would say, someone like they're checking back here for balance or something.
Yeah.
and
Or like to
which
protect their checking range or whatever.
to protect their checking range, and people would attack that. And there's a sense in which that's like not true, but the sense in which it's not true is because it's teleologically not true, because it's like that actually might not be the intention, if that makes sense. There might be a better intention we can capture that with, but there's also a sense in which that describing solvers in this way is really useful, like describing solver outputs in this way. Yeah. And I do think there's a large swath of the poker population that has like been slowly moving away from this kind of explanation of strategy and closer to, and like believing that like if I just do better, it'll be this purely like, again, quantitative calculator on solver play.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting you frame it that way, because I'm like recognizing, I guess, now the value of my stubbornness that has stuck me in the way that I talk about solvers being like a human interpretation of solver play. Like I have this, I don't know why, I just have this resistance towards describing solver output in like the absolute way. So I'm always kind of like, oh yeah, you're doing this to accomplish that, or this makes sense within my strategy because it helps me do this better on later streets or whatever. I'm always kind of integrating it into my own personal thought process. And I know a lot of people from my generation of the game are similar thinkers. Like they never went fully in the direction of copying strategy and just talking about it as the absolute strategy. We all just kind of integrated it into what we previously understood about how the game operated. And there's not a lot that happens in solver play that contradicts the way that we thought the game was supposed to operate. There's just learn extra little tricks and details of which bet size makes sense where, and more precision. But we had the general idea right. It's still just the push and pull of trying to exploit each other.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, you can overbet here with way weaker a hand than I thought you could, or like things like that, like you said, more precision. And it brings to mind, because when we were talking about, the kind of explicit leaning and why people do it against like pros who play better against pros, and why they might do it against fish is because they're kind of discomfort with fish. I do think there's this kind of just broad discomfort with play that some players encounter, right? Just this broad discomfort with, now that poker's so public, there's so much shared knowledge, there's so many ideas around what is good, what is bad. A lot of players are plagued with this broad discomfort around doing something bad. And where that pushes them is more explicit, conceptual, solid. Like they just want things they can hold on to. They just want ideas that feel tangible and permanent, that they can, and strategies that are like fixed and that I can just hold on to, and this is how I play. And that feels confidence inducing.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many. It doesn't have to be a bad player. Like there's so many winning players that you can point to who do some unorthodox things. They I guess unabashedly play in a way that they feel like is good, but they make a bunch of blunders if you kind of evaluate their play by solver metrics. And it is kind of funny observing like the interaction of those two types of players, like watching the seemingly clueless, old school pro doing things that make no sense, according to the new school, and then winning. And then it's like, okay, well, do I come up with ways to explain why they're actually bad and why they're going to lose in the future? Or do I take the humble approach and just think, okay, what might be successful about what it is that they're doing? Like take some time to think from the point of view. If, let's suppose they are good. Let's suppose that this is a good idea. Like what would make it a good idea? What conditions would have to be right about their opponents or about me or whatever? And that's an uncomfortable thing to face. But I think it's like smart to go about it that way, not to take the other extreme approach, which is like everyone who's winning is the best in the world, so I need to reverse engineer their play and figure out how they do it. Like that's not healthy. But also like, oh, what a stupid sun runner. They obviously play terrible. Like I can't wait until I see them lose. Like that's clearly not healthy either. So I think the middle ground is like, let's propose the idea that maybe they know what they're doing, or maybe there's some merit to the way that they're playing. Like what would have to be true, and kind of exploring that.
Yeah. And I think this pushes into the topic that I wasn't sure if we were going to get to, but this is a good segue of just playing. Like when you were talking about the what's the game, the series? Why can't the Solve for Why series? Why can't I think of it now?
Poker Out Loud.
Poker Out Loud. So when you were discussing Poker Out Loud and how everyone is talking more and about more meaningless things and playing worse, I really think this has to do with the amount of eyes people feel are on them, right? Like this is going to be viewed. And one of the things I do think, if there's a single thing that I think, and I know we've talked about this a lot, but would cause people to just play better, certainly over time, is this sense of I'm just going to play how I'm going to play, no matter who's watching, for whatever reason. And because what you see in this status-based worry or anxiety, and this came up with status came up in my conversation with Lucky Chewy, but really what you're seeing when people are like now talking out loud on a series they know is going to be filmed, they're explaining themselves. This is like a status-based concern now. They're like, how am I going to see through the filter of other people? And that kind of worry causes us to try to fit into a box. Like we're trying to fit our strategy into a box that will be exported to the minds of the mass numbers of people and perceived as okay. Right. And I think a lot of people are just doing this in their own private lives. Like they're just in their own head wondering, if I play this way, what would people think when I reveal it to them? Mm-hmm. Right. And similarly, people can get this. I don't know if you've ever worked with a student where this is funny. They can get this calculus wrong. They can think they've played in a brilliant way that will be exported and everyone will recognize as brilliant. And they bring you this hand, like, look, this incredible play that I did. And it's the most awkward encounter in the world where you're like, this is truly terrible. Like, this is like, there's no way this is good, you know? But yeah, I think this kind of society, this cultural pressure that we feel to like play in a way that is defensible, like is that people will accept, and that people will accept me as a poker player when I play this way. Yeah. Creates a lot of the pressure that we see for people to interpret and approach the game in a specific way.
I definitely see that in some players. Like I don't know how widespread that issue is across, different player types or across the community, but you definitely see it more in like, you almost see the two poles on streamed games more often, I think, than you would have seen without streamed games. Like if you're seeing people who are very willing to go for it and very willing to make what seem like insane plays because they're chasing the glory of having it work, and they want to make the highlight reel. They want to do the thing that gets everyone talking about how great they are.
That's really the same problem, though.
And yeah, that's on the other side of being too afraid to step outside of the socially acceptable playbook in any way. And as a result, they just kind of fold their way. Usually it's passive play. I think that gets overdone if you're afraid to step outside the bounds of what's acceptable. But it's not always the case. Like there's definitely some people I can think of who kind of glory seek, but in a solver oriented way. Like they really, really want to make the play that they saw in that one solution that one time, but maybe they don't realize they're doing this, so they see the thing that's cool. Hilarious. And then every time a new spot comes up and there's an opportunity to play the hand that way, it's like, this is how I do it. Like, this is how I show the world that I studied. And I mean, I'm not suggesting this is stuff you can like easily spot, but I know that these are the types of things that happen to even like quite good players. If they don't self-reflect, I guess is the simplest way of putting it.
Yeah. And I think this is sinister and sneaky. I mean, I think this is why I have a job in poker doing performance coaching, because I do think it is surprisingly easy to miss yourself doing this kind of filtering based on what you think your culture would accept within poker, because it's so natural to do it in every other area of your life. I think people generally really struggle with just being themselves kind of unashamedly, and just kind of being totally okay with who they are and what they felt was right, and doing what they felt was right, and in every area of their lives. And I think it can be really, like I said, really subtle and sneaky how this tension can just weave itself into yourself, and like the kind of mental gymnastics we can go through to kind of think, And you know what's funny is you see resentment from so many poker players who've been in it for a while, like kind of towards the game of poker. And it reminds me of people who've been in relationships where they've just like literal romantic relationships where they've given up their autonomy, like literally where they've just been like, this person's approval matters so much to me. I'm kind of people pleasing to kind of get this person to accept me. And then they end up resenting and hating this person for really this relationship they can agreed to. And this, I've never thought about this analogy before now, but this reminds me of people in poker. People get in poker and they think like, okay, if I just do the things that I'm supposed to do, like poker will reward me, poker will give me what I'm looking for. And then you get these people who are super resentful of other people's success, resentful of, and it just reminds me of that. Awesome. So yeah, I guess I'll just actually leave it open. Do you have any last lingering thoughts on this topic?
Not really. I mean, I think if I go back to the way you brought it up and like emphasize the value of this, storytelling nature, I guess, of interpreting the game or like viewing the game, it fits in nicely with my own desire to just kind of, make sure that people don't get too obsessed with high level theory and remember that they're playing a human game and humans interpret the things that they're doing and a human is the one who's running the strategy that they are running because they themselves are human. And there's a lot to learn there, and there's a lot to improve at there if you take that part of the game seriously or just like take that part of life seriously. But I definitely like everything that you said at the start about the perception, I guess, that like top players are, less like this and more like rigid, high level decision makers is, in my experience or in my opinion, just completely not true. And while I do think there are people who try to move in that direction in their improvement, they're still at the end of the day making poker decisions like humans, through those qualitative assessments.
Yeah, and I guess this speaks also in my view to the value of coaching. I think there's a lot of dispute over, like I've heard, people say, which I think are ridiculous takes, but like, why do you need coaching? There's so much information, there's so much data, there's so much stuff out there. And to me, it's for the exact reasons you just said. This is a human game, and how a human has learned to do this matters. Right? Like if you were another computer learning from a computer, that'd be one thing, but how a human being has learned to integrate what you're seeing in play into actual play and win with it, and learning from a human who has done that, I think is really important. And I think
that's where the opportunities are. I mean, that's where the opportunities to find edges lie, right? Like what's difficult about playing the solution here? What's challenging for this human with the construct that they have about decision making? Like what's going to be challenging for them? That's the question that I try to ask people a lot when they're looking at these solutions.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Kevin. Tell people where they can find you, where they can hear more from you, and then any projects you want to share with people or promote.
Yeah, for sure. All my coaching products and information are at myfullname.com. That's kevinrabichow.com. We've got a group coaching project coming up in 2025 that I'm sure there's going to be like a page or a banner or something on the website when all that information is live. And I'm working on a new course that teaches heads up for tournament players in a concise and easy to follow way. I'm hoping to have that out by end of January 2025. And again, that's just going to be on my website. But you can follow me on Twitter or on Instagram at krabichow, first initial, last name.
Perfect. Well, it's always good to talk to you. And yeah, I'm excited. I think this will be a good conversation for people to listen to. So until next time.
Thanks, Jared. Had a good time. Nice talking to you.
All right, that was Kevin Rabichow. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I do donation-based coachings every week for those of you who are looking for more help. And please like and subscribe this for more content on the way. Until next time.